Hey everyone, welcome to The Future is Golden. I'm Ruthie Kim, and this is a podcast where we explore what it looks like to step fully into your purpose, potential, and influence. I'm so thrilled today to be joined by my friend Ale Siekmeier. Ale is a new friend. We met in London last year at a conference called Renaissance, and the moment I met Ale, I was like, we are going to be friends. We are going to do life together. We're going to do ministry together. We have to, because she is so full of fire, so full of the Holy Spirit, and it's just a joy to be around her. Ale is originally from Guatemala. She is a life and relationship coach. She's also the founder of the Nett, which is a modern approach to Christian singleness, dating, and pre-engagement. She's a leader at her church in Church of the City, New York, and she's been married to her husband, Ben, for 13 years. Ale, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It is such an honor. And right back at you, friend. The moment I met you, I saw fire in you, I saw passion, and I said, this is someone that I want to partner with.
Well, this is hopefully first of many ways that we will partner
Yes.
together. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. Ale, today we're talking about dating and marriage. So listeners, if you are tuning in thinking, what's this is going to be about? Get ready, because we are going to cover some topics that may be a little sensitive, maybe kinds of things you're like, I wish people were talking about that. We're going to get into vulnerability. We're going to get into secrets in marriage. We're going to get into first dates. So let's dive right in. Ale, you've been in this work, in this field for many years. You have coached hundreds, if not thousands, of women around relationships and dating and marriage. But first, tell us, how did you get into this? Like, what's your story and how does it inspire the work that you do?
Yeah, I think, I'm passionate about healing because I have experienced healing and wholeness in my own life. I will say my passion is relationships, but it's healthy relationships. And I think that begins with my story. Like you said, I grew up in Guatemala. I have a background of sexual abuse and addiction. So a lot of pain, a lot of baggage, a lot of trauma, little t traumas in my life, as well as big T traumas that I felt like I had to overcome. So, in a journey of healing of my own through therapy, through inner healing, I feel like I have found freedom and healing. And this has like created passion in my heart and ignite a desire to help people heal. So, because of the trauma, because of what happened to me, I had a lot of shame in my life. So I felt like I learned my operating mechanisms were to avoid. I had an attachment style of avoidant. And that was my defense mechanism to avoid and to really partner in with shame that really like I felt like I had to hide my past in my life out of fear of not being like loved or rejected. So through a season of and process of healing, I mean, this is an ongoing journey for me. I'm still in it. God
Yeah.
exposes new and different things. God has really allowed me just to live a life of no secrets and a life of freedom. And this is an intentional life that I pursue, and it's my passion to help people live in the same way.
Wow. Ale, one of the things I just so appreciate about you is you just come right out the gate with that vulnerability. Like, you were honest. You're like, this is my story. This is what I've been through. And as I listen to you, it occurs to me such a story of redemption. Like, God has taken places that were so broken, so lost in many ways, flipped it around, done such a deep healing in you, and continues to. And now that story of redemption is fueling so much of what you do in the world. So thank you again for coming on and sharing. Ali, let's dive in with dating. So I know we've got a lot of listeners who are either dating or wanting to date. These streets out here in San Francisco, they're pretty hard. I'm guessing it's the same in New York
Same in New
City.
York.
Yeah. So we got a lot of people listening and like, ooh, give us some help, give us some tips. So let's dive right in with that first date. So people are maybe they're on the apps, maybe they've been introduced by a friend. What are some of the wisdom that you share as people are heading into a first date? Things how they could prepare, how they could show up. What comes to mind for you?
This is so good. And first of all, I want to acknowledge the vulnerability that comes in dating. I want to say dating is it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable because you're taking risks in many different ways. You're coming out of your comfort zone. You might be getting exposed to rejection, or you might be getting exposed to a relationship that brings a lot of beautiful things, but it also confronts a lot of areas of our hearts that maybe they don't necessarily come out in different relationships, except for
Mm.
romantic relationships. So I want to acknowledge that if you are single, ready to mingle, if you are dating, good on you. You are being so brave and so you're being brave. Truly, this is vulnerable and it's not easy. So I wanna lead with that. That dating is an exploration of am I going to meet someone that is compatible to me? Am I going to meet someone that share mutual values? And with that, like I feel like dating is not black and white. Dating has a lot of nuances. So I would love to talk from nuances places, that is not like straight up black and white. There's a lot of
Yeah.
nuances, and no one is an
Yeah.
expert at it. I think the more you date, the more your muscles grow and the more you learn. So I
Mm.
will say, like, dating is a process of learning.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And you reminded me that to remind our listeners that this topic of courage is really what we've been talking about on this podcast. And so thank you for framing that up, because dating is scary. It's
Scary.
risky, like you said. It can elicit all kinds of emotions that maybe we're not used to, and there's a level of courage that we have to step into when we're stepping into dating, or even thinking about dating, thinking about stepping back into that world. I like, as somebody goes onto a first date, conversation starts, and I imagine that that is a time getting to know one another and sharing stories. I also know that, as I've chatted with a lot of women who are listening into this podcast, sometimes there's a question of how much do I share on that first date? How would I know? Do I share my whole story? Do I lay it all out there? Do I hold everything back until the ring is on my finger? Like, could you speak a little bit to that?
This is so good. This is so important. And I will say, like, first of all, I work with a lot of people that want to learn how to date well. So, for starters, my rule is go on at least 3 dates. I know Dr. Henry Cloud, which I love. I get a lot of wisdom from him. He
Mm,
encourages people to go on 5 dates. So, we're going to meet in the middle with
okay.
Dr. Henry
Yeah.
Cloud, and I encourage people go at least on 3 dates. And the
Yeah.
reason why is, first date can be awkward, right? You're nervous. This is so vulnerable, like I said at the beginning. So, second date, you probably feel a little bit more comfortable in your own skin. You probably, got familiar with the person. And, if it's a maybe, it's a yes.
Hmm.
If it's a
Yeah.
no, if it's a no
I'm
from the
curious.
beginning, you know.
Okay, so what I'm hearing there is, if you from the get go, if you're like a no, then cool. But if it's a
Yes.
maybe, because one of the things I do hear sometimes women say is like, well, I met up with someone and it wasn't fireworks. It wasn't like 100% I knew. Is that a bad sign? What would you say to that?
It's not a bad sign. Actually, like that happens to a lot of people that have great marriages now and that are succeeding in
That was my
relationships.
story. Yeah.
Same. I at first I was like, is my husband my type? No. But then I got to know him and his heart, and attraction grew, and I fell in love with him. But was he, if I would have not say yes to that maybe, I would not have met like the person that I love today, my best friend. So I will say, just for starters, if it's a maybe, it's a yes. Keep
Yeah.
exploring the connection.
Yeah. Ali, you said something as we were prepping for this call. You talked about the idea of, as trust builds, vulnerability increases. Can you
Yes.
talk about what you meant by that?
Absolutely. And, that's going back to your point, right? How much do I share if I go on a first date? I will encourage you, guard your heart, right? Like, your heart is sacred. It is precious, is your story, is the DNA, is the core of who you are. So I would not personally share the story of my life, right? On the first date. And I believe, like as Christians, we have a culture of like, let's share testimonies. And,
Mm,
we can share a high level, like story testimony about your life, right? I feel like that is vulnerable, but that is not exposing like the depths of vulnerability of your soul. That I think
yeah,
that it should be protected, right? And I
yeah,
think that as you get to know someone, as you feel safe, as you discover if this person is safe and it will be safe with your heart, I think the more safety there is, the more permission there is to be vulnerable and to grow in trust, for the person to get to hear more of the depths of your story, and maybe the vulnerable sides of your story that might not be easy to share,
yeah.
like at all. But I feel like the more you get to know someone's heart, the more permission you have to choose if you can trust them with your heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I'm hearing in that, alley, is like being sober about where the relationship is at. I've had conversations with women who um, almost act as if the dating process is marriage,
Right.
and getting really clear on where is the level of commitment, where is the level of trust at, and allowing the vulnerability and how we show up to grow over time. Because if you've been dating for a month, that's not marriage. That's not the safe place to share all the details that maybe you would in a committed long-term relationship. And so I think getting really sober and really clear on where the relationship at is helpful in that. Ali, here's a curveball that we didn't prep for, but I imagine that you've got some thoughts on this. The dating apps. Let's talk about the dating
Let's
apps
talk
for a
about
moment.
apps.
So I've got a lot of friends right now on the apps, off the apps, frustrated by the apps. I've got some single friends sending me like screenshots of just horrific, honestly, stuff that gets thrown at them on the apps.
Yes.
And a whole generation of people who want to date. They want to date in healthy ways.
Yes.
Christians who are looking to date, with kingdom principles. How do you help people navigate the apps? Because it is a tool. People are on them.
Yes.
How do you guide them in that process?
Such a good question. I mean, I don't demonize apps, right? Like you said, it is a tool, right? It is a tool that will facilitate connection. However, we live also in a digital age. So I feel like there is a sense of like exhaustion, right? Where
Yes.
people feel burnout, people feel exhausted by like swiping. I do feel like, like if you're in the apps for a season, great. Like give it a chance, explore it. If you feel in your gut, this is not bringing peace to my mental health, this is creating more anxiety, this is, I'm spending unnecessary time in the apps and is limiting me from like having real connections in the real world,
Yeah.
don't use them. So, like I feel like not like this can be a beneficial tool, but if it's affecting you in ways that is not healthy, like I would discourage against using the apps. I
Yeah.
think, like what I tell people, this might be just like practical, is it is easy to hide behind a screen. So why
Mm.
don't you like schedule phone calls, right? Like it's so much better to like get to hear someone's voice, and you get to hear someone's personality over the phone. And this might be an old school approach, but I feel like it can work, right? Like, so I see a lot of people like going back and forth for days on end, and
Mm.
that spends their emotional energy. People feel exhausted, they feel like they have this sense of vulnerability hangover because they overshare. So instead of maybe like spending 3 days back and forth chatting, I would set a boundary as, hey, like, do you want to jump on a call? Like, I will rather like take this conversation on a phone call.
Yeah, wow, that's great. That's great wisdom. Like going into it knowing this is how long I'm committed to going back and forth on a digital device. Let's move to the humanity portion of
Yes,
this quicker. Like,
yes.
let's hear your voice and connect. Ali, what about people that are like, did the apps over it? What are some other ways that singles who, to quote you, are ready to mingle, ready to meet people, especially Christian people? How can they find people to date? What are some things that you advise people to try?
Lean in into your community. I think that, so in New York, there's a lot of singles initiatives now because I think people are burned out. I think 2020, the apps like exploded, right? And it was a great way to meet people. But right now that we're post pandemic, people are ready for real life connection. People are craving community. I think, there is an epidemic of loneliness. And yes, like dating it might be included in that, but I think getting outside, going to a party, going to a birthday, going to a social event, I tell people there are two things that can happen. You can have a romantic connection, and that is great. Or also, you can meet a meaningful friend, and that is
Mm,
also a win. So
mm,
I tell people like, hey, like who are the most extroverted social person of your friend group? Rely on that person to invite you to things. Like ask them like, when is the next social event? What is happening in town? Go to mixers. I love throwing mixers for my single friends, and that's part of my job. That's what I do. I throw fun parties with a purpose for people to meet each other, and it can be in a romantic setting as well as in friendship settings.
yeah. Yeah, it's reminding me of a friend that I have right now who did the very bold and courageous ask of emailing, texting friends, and simply saying, I am looking to date. This is who I'm looking for. Who do you know? And that it takes courage to put that out
Yes.
there. But that is a way to like lean into our community, because how many folks are out there wanting to date, but maybe aren't sharing that or aren't telling some of their closest circle, like be on the lookout, connect me with people. Like you said, invite me to things. Love that real life connection there, Ali. Ali, let's shift into talking about marriage.
Love it.
Both you and I, you and I have been, both of us have been married for a long time to our husbands, and so I'm sure there's a lot we can tease open here. What are some of the challenges that you and Ben have faced over the years? Some things that feel like obstacles, and how did you overcome them?
I Such a good question. I mean, I first want to say if you want to be formed to be more like Jesus, get married. Formation is, I mean, for my life, I also believe like there are people that are choose to be single and Jesus will form them. Um,
Absolutely.
it's both. But for me personally, in my own story, God has formed my life and my character through being married. I
Mm,
have learned how to die to self through marriage. And my husband is my best friend. I mean, he's not only my best friend, my partner, we are teammates. There's nothing that brings me more joy than to like co-labor together and see God's kingdom coming to earth with my husband. We have such a beautiful synergy. And I think that we have this because it has cost us a lot. We have had a lot of seasons of pain and hardship in our marriage. And I think, especially from both of our stories, right? Like he has trauma in his stories, I have trauma in my story. And a lot of my unresolved trauma, because we got married young, was hindering our connection. So there was always this sense where I could not really fathom or receive my husband's love. I felt like I had to like prove myself to him. I had to perform in order for
mm,
him to accept me. And because we got married young, I made a mistake early on in our marriage to hide things about my past. I didn't want to
mm,
tell him some of the things that had happened to me because I was so riddled in shame. And I was so terrified. What if he leaves me the moment I share this? And I had all of these narratives that were rooted in a lie, to be honest, that were hindering me from really showing up for who I really was. And it wasn't until I really confessed to my husband, like, these are things that I feel like I need to tell you. And his reaction and his response was so like Christ like for me in that moment. He one covered me, he validated me, he cried with me. And I felt like that gave me freedom and permission to be seen in my relationship with him. So I think that that was like a huge part of, that is a huge part of our story of marriage, just overcoming shame. That
yeah.
from because I was partnering with shame, it was hindering me from really knowing my husband, but also from him really knowing me.
Yeah. Ale, I'm imagining there's a lot of people listening who can relate to that. They're married, maybe they've been married a short time, long time. There are some things that are hidden, haven't been talked through. I'm also imagining that not everybody is married to somebody quite like your husband. It
Mhm.
sounds like he had the most beautiful Christ-like response to you. And sometimes that is not the situation, right? We try and share, we try and have conversations. What is your experience with therapy, advice maybe for couples who are trying to navigate difficult conversations? And frankly, it's difficult, and it's not that ideal, like, oh my gosh, I love you, you're forgiven, but actually it creates more tension. How would you advise couples like that who are maybe considering heading into therapy to process some things?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the times we don't know because we haven't been taught, right? So it's not your fault. Maybe you grew up in a home that your parents really never talked about conflict. It was maybe avoidant or even passive aggressive. So those were behaviors that we learn by observation, right? And the moment we confront, tension in our marriage or in our relationships, it can feel really scary because we don't have the tools. So I think nowadays, we have so many incredible tools out there. We have podcasts such as your podcast. We have incredible trained professionals that can help us navigate and can teach us the tools. I was at a dinner party this weekend. A group of my friends, we're all millennials, and we were talking about how a lot of us feel like we never really knew our parents. We knew them as like parents that provided, as parents that would, like would take us to school or help us do our homework, but we didn't really got to know our parents as humans. And a lot of our parents probably learned that behavior from their parents that came from a generation post-war, right? That
Yeah.
didn't know how to deal with the trauma and the pain. So their operating systems oftentimes probably was just not talking about the real. And
Yeah.
as millennials, we crave to connection, right? Like we know, like we want to know people because maybe we came from environments where people didn't talk to each other. So that's just
Yeah.
an example, I think, of if you are experiencing tension in your marriage, if you're not talking to each other, or if you don't know how, ask for help. It takes vulnerability and also courage to ask for help. But I promise you, it will be worth it.
Yeah, it does. It takes courage to say, hey, we can't figure this out between us. And I think that in and of itself can be another area of secrecy, right? Like we have this issue, we have this challenge, and we feel like we've got to be able to figure it out. And it does take courage to say, you know what, we need to schedule some therapy. We need to pull in, someone at our church that is trusted, that is experienced, that can guide us through this. One of the other things, I have a good friend who one time was telling me about how her and her husband were in therapy, and she was like, our marriage is great. Our marriage is fantastic. I love my husband. He loves me. We are not heading for divorce, but we are doing the tune-up work. Like we are
Yes.
seeing the small little places that we're like, ooh, I wonder what that is. Like if we leave that unattended to for the next decade, then we're going to have some problems. And I thought that was
Yes.
such a refreshing
So
reflection
wise.
on therapy. And my husband is a therapist, and I know that he would second this if he were right here. Is like,
Don't
don't wait
wait.
until it's that moment where you're like, I don't think we can do this anymore. Like if you're just now seeing something as like, dive in and do the work, because it is so empowering, so healing. And you are, like you're saying, like we're setting ourselves up for the generations that are going to come after us to step into wholeness, to step into
Yes.
healing. So doing that early stuff is so powerful. Ali, what about fostering a relationship where transparency and openness and vulnerability in marriage happens? Because you told me a story coming into this call about shopping. Would you mind sharing that story again? Because I
Yes.
love the practicality of it. And then also, what does it look like on a very tangible, practical level for couples to foster that kind of transparency?
That's so important. So my husband and I teach a course called Healthy Soul through my church, Church of the City. And one of the lectures is the first lecture is on identity. And the teaching consists about showing up as our authentic selves, right? The broken parts, the messy parts, the beautiful parts, all the parts, in a commitment to live a life of no secrets. So I am very committed. I do not have it perfectly because this story is about to show you that I have not practiced this perfectly. I'm in process. I'm learning what it looks like to, have a life of no secrets. And my husband and I have committed that even when it's embarrassing, even when it feels a little humiliating, we are going to commit to honesty and transparency.
Mm,
And that has just brought a lot of freedom. And like one of those things is like practically as I love shopping. I'm a shopping girl. We love Zara, and I did a little much damage one time at Zara, and I came home and I literally hid my bags outside my
mhm.
door. And then I just had this like moment of conviction. Like I felt like the Holy Spirit said to me in that moment, "Why are you hiding?
Yeah,
Like, why is this something? I mean, it's simple as like shopping, right? Where you feel like you need to hide from Ben in this moment, where you feel like you need to hide the truth from him." And I felt like that was a sobering moment for me because if I were to hit that reality from him, even if it seemed small, right? Even if it seemed like it was not a big deal, I felt that like that moment challenged me not to hide the little things that would
yeah,
first like that would maybe like cause bigger, hidden secrets in the future. So it really convicted me. And when I share that with Ben, like, hey, I did too much damage in shopping, he was gracious about it. He's like, hey, like I'm gonna challenge you. Like let's stick to our budget. Like we want to travel, so let's be strict. But thank you for telling me. Thank you for not hiding this from me. So I just
yeah.
feel like, like this is very simple and a lot of us might identify to this, but it is, even in the little things, I feel like the little things are important just to be committed to fostering a culture of transparency, vulnerability, and truth.
Mm. Ali, that's so good. I wrote down what you said there, like a commitment to living a life of no secrets. Maybe to our listeners who are tuning in for this conversation, so much goodness here. But I wonder if that might be a takeaway for many of us. Like, what does it look like to really sit with that? Do we want to commit to that? And, as especially in the context of our marriage, to really maybe audit the landscape of our relationship, and are there those little places where we are hiding? And, the example of the shopping is perfect. I think that many of us can relate to that moment where we're coming home, we're like, okay, like little past the budget, like not aligned with the agreement that we've had those moments. I also imagine too that one of the areas that many of us, how we hide in marriage, is our emotions. Like we're angry about
Yes.
something, we want to confront something, but we don't. We're deeply sad, maybe even struggling with depression. What
Yes.
would you say to the person listening into this conversation here right now, whose ears just perked up and was like, yeah, my partner does not know how I feel about that? How would you advise them?
Yeah, I mean, I will start by saying you have permission to go to God in that state.
Mm,
One of the phrases that my pastor used in one of his sermons, John Tyson, he said, God can't heal who you pretend to be.
yes.
And God knows everything, right? But there's something so powerful when we choose to come clean, right? I'm really sad. I'm really disappointed. I
Yeah.
feel hopeless today. Whatever it is, to come before our Father, our loving, safe, heavenly Father, and come clean with the state of our soul. I think that's the place of the starting point, right? Of living transparently in our emotions, coming to the Lord before we go to anyone and say, here I am. This is all of me. This is the ugly parts, the messy, the pain, the disappointments, the anger. Um,
Yeah.
and he sees you, right? And validates you. And I feel like that moment gives us courage to show up with our safe community. It doesn't have to be 150 people. Choose
Mhm.
two people that are safe, that have been in your corner, that know how to listen, that whenever you talk, they don't turn your story and make it about themselves. People that are for you, that love you. I feel like all you need is one, two people that are safe, that will give you the courage for you to show up as yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Ali, I think many of us grew up in religious communities where, number one, we didn't feel that freedom to go to God. You know, it was kind of like
Yes.
Sunday best.
Yeah.
Um, be grateful. Jesus died on the cross for you, so just suck up the rest of it, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, in my
Be
in my
good.
adult yeah, be good. In my adult years, as I look at the Psalms, right, like 2/3 of the Psalms are the psalmist basically being like, I'm sad, I'm disappointed, and I'm mad, you know, like they're
Yes.
disoriented. They're like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. So I love that permission to just simply say, if you are in a marriage and you are disappointed, Jesus wants to hear about that.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to tuck that down. If you are angry with your spouse and you feel shame because there's so much anger and resentment, you can take that to Jesus, and he's not going to judge you or reject you, but he will invite you into a different way of being in your relationship.
That's
So
right.
love that call out. And I imagine that the emotional vulnerability, the being real with our spouses about where we're at is a journey too, right? Like if you have a marriage where both people are sort of avoidant of talking
Mm-hmm.
about emotions, it's going to take a while to begin that process.
Yes.
And maybe it includes therapy, and maybe it includes the friends like you mentioned, but that taking that first step, maybe as a result of even listening to this podcast, is going to be so powerful, because as you described earlier with your relationship with Ben, that's where the intimacy happens, right? When there's
Yes.
the secrets fall away and the transparency comes forward.
Yes. When you're seeing each other, into me, you see, I feel like you create intimacy, you create connection, like vulnerability bonds you in a beautiful
Yeah,
way. And like you said, if you don't have like the community, go to a therapist, go
yeah,
to someone that has the tools to provide your own tools. And it might take you a little bit. At first, it might feel funny, like almost like if you're learning how to dance, right? It can be awkward. You're going to step into each other's feet all the time. And that's
yeah.
okay. But that's the beginning place, right? And I feel like if you start and give yourself permission to start sloppy, that's okay. You're going to
Yes.
get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Ali, I feel like we could talk all day.
Same. I love talking to you.
We gotta wrap this podcast. If you were to leave an encouragement, something for those who are dating, those who are married, as it relates to courage, what would you want to leave us with today?
I think the most courageous form is to show up as yourself, right? Like, who are you? Regardless if you're dating, regardless if you're single, regardless if you are married, who are you as a person? And I think who you are is worthy to be loved, worthy to be accepted, worthy to show up in the world. So I think it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability for you to show up as yourself.
Yeah, so good. Amazing. Ali, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for all you've invested. This has been a fantastic conversation.